Welcome to Innovation Tales, your go-to podcast for the human side of digital transformation.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Innovation Tales. Does your organization rely on external partners located offshore? Or are they closer to you but their employees have been working from home since the pandemic? What factors influence their creativity and productivity? We explore these questions and more with today's guest, Damien Helleboid. In a conversation rich with vivid examples, he emphasizes the impact that trust and teamwork have on digital transformation initiatives. Damien is the Director of Prarion Limited. He brings a rich blend of technical mastery and leadership acumen. His career spans a variety of functions across major tech firms, while his pivotal roles at Transavia and LeasePlan demonstrate his ability to lead digital projects from vision to execution. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Damien Helleboid. Damien, welcome.
Alex, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the show, especially because of your diverse experience. You've held implementation, pre-sales, leadership roles.
Yep, pretty much.
So can you start by describing what was different between them and what was common to them?
Good question. I would say that the common point is every single time it's about resolving issues. Now, depending on the position, the issues might be slightly different, but because it is technology, it's always similar types of issue, let's say. To be honest, one of the most common one is usually human issues. A program's a bit stupid. It does what it's programmed to do. And oftentimes it's especially in pre-sales, right? In pre-sales, you're going in and you know what your technology can do, and you just want to see if there's going to be a fit with the business you're interacting with, either a prospect, an existing client. And I think some of the issues are also similar in nature, but you're also arriving at a different stage in the mind of the business you're interacting with. So particularly in pre-sales, you're arriving, there's no project, they have an issue. They're trying to solve it, and you're there to kind of shape, can we fix it using this technology or not? Whereas when you're in implementation, particularly, you're arriving after the fact, right? You're arriving, this technology has been sold with, various promises. Let's various promises, and you need
Let's
to
call them
fulfill
assumptions.
Let's call them assumptions. Yeah. Usually the head of businesses, it's usually promises, and it's But anyways, you arrive there, and the business has a clear idea, and you need to go and implement it. And I think in leadership position, you're a little bit. It's not as much as a point in time, like before or after. It's more, we have these types of issue. How are we going to solve them? So obviously, it was always, my positions were always linked to Pega. So right now I'm in, a COE leadership position. But still, there's definitely a mix between both. Like, we're having typical questions around, should we upgrade, for instance, which is more a pre-sale type of questioning, because you can make the decision or not, and then you decide to implement or not, and then you will have implementation problem when you decide to go with the upgrade. So there's a little bit of a mix of both, and I think the leadership has definitely a lot more of the human aspect to take into account.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So timing is clearly different, and then the proportion maybe between the human element and the focus on the technology.
Echoes of Innovation.
As we navigate today's stories of innovation, I advise to use discretion with names and specifics in order to bring authentic insights to our audience while upholding the highest levels of privacy and respect for all individuals involved.
Yep, makes sense.
People embark on digital transformations. There's some aspects that may be overrated. And then other aspects very often at the beginning seem to be left to chance, only to be, later on put to the forefront because, you couldn't really avoid them. What's your experience?
For digital transformation, there's always unknown, because you have a business, right? And you let's say you have it, but it was, one of the example I wanted to take anyway. So that's a good segue. But I remember I went on a project that was, it was fully paper. We were doing KYC for a bank, completely paper. It's like everywhere. Like some of the guys didn't even have a screen, which, I mean, I'm a millennial. It's just like, oh, right, okay. There's no screen in this office, and it's all paper. And the office manager, lovely lady, was there, and she was like, oh yeah, so yeah, this is where. So we take these paper from this basket, and then we move it to this desk, and you could just see the flow of paper going around the office. And you had like massive blackboards with stats, and you had a guy running between desks, say, how many have you done, and he would just go and report on the blackboard. And I'm assuming that must have been how business was done before, right? So I think these guys, when you come in, like, their expectations are super high, if that's kind of where you wanted to go with your question.
Absolutely, yeah. What was, do you think, their expectations? What did they imagine was going to happen?
They wanted, just like, let's get rid of the paper. I mean, they had like these funny stories. Like at some point they had like it was loan applications for small to medium enterprises, and we're like, oh yeah, at some point we had some companies coming back to us, and it's like, well, we've applied like a month ago and you haven't come back to us, and we're like, I don't know, we don't have your application. It turned out like a pile of paper had fallen behind a shelf. It's that kind of. So I think. I mean, it's kind of funny like that, but it's not funny for the businesses, because you actually have small and medium businesses that are counting on the bank to actually provide the credit. So what they wanted was to become more efficient, track better. Obviously, in this world, there's a lot of fraud. They wanted to become more efficient with that kind of stuff. I mean, their fraud was basically a big Google search string that they would put the name of the people in there. That was pretty much their KYC at the time, and obviously they wanted to improve on that. So I think they both expected a technological revolution. We can talk about revolution in that office, because they really didn't have a computer. And again, most of the guys were 20 something years old, glued on their phones, and they're there working with paper. So for them, it was like, yeah, we're going to get a computer that's going to, we're going to become more efficient. And I think from a business perspective, there was definitely this expectation that we'd help them build and design their process. So not, in conjunction, like helping each other. So we bring both our technological expertise, but also some of our business expertise, because I don't know, KYC is probably the one thing I've implemented the most overall, even though it probably only represent 15% or 20% of what I've done. It's still, I don't know, I must have done at least 3 or 4 KYC, if not more than that.
It's very specific.
It's a very specific
domain, yeah.
It's a very specific domain. So yeah, the expectation is both technological, but also business knowledge, because they know you've done it before. So they are waiting for a bit of guidance. And it's always not always smooth, but it never is anyways.
Yeah, so the business people, they're not familiar with the technology at first, and they will not just learn about all of the implications. They might see demos of functionality, but understanding how various configuration options affect, I don't know, how much they're going to be paying every year for maintenance or something like that.
Performance.
Performance, that even impacts them even earlier.
It does. And they're like, oh, why is it so slow? Because you didn't let us do our work.
Yes. So that is not something that they can get out of a single demo. And so in that example, you're saying that it went quite well, right? So
yes.
What made it go smoother than usual?
Okay, so I think first of all, like I said, we're on paper. There was a real willingness to move away from paper, and I think I mentioned it earlier, for many reasons, right? Efficiency, not losing paper, etc., etc. So I think there was a real drive to get that done. And I think that sometimes that's something that gets a little bit lost. Like you will get, customers or people coming to you just because they think they have to, but they already have a system. It might not be the most perfect system, but it allows them to do their job. And so sometimes there can be, overkill in terms of, your drive. Well, no, it's you don't really have the drive. You think you need to do that other digital transformation, but you don't really actually. You just need to think about, or you haven't thought about it properly. Or one thing that I did learn in pre-sale that was interesting, it's one of the account exec that taught me that is, when a prospect or an existing customer comes with a problem, you need to really read between the lines, because oftentimes the problem that they're going to describe, first of all, they're going to already solutionize it. So they're going to come to you with a solution that's going to sound like a problem. And it's your job to actually try to, scratch a little bit, just scratch, ask the right question, figure out actually what's the real problem. Do they really need a new software, or, is the software that they want, or kind of the path they want to take for their software the correct one? And that's where you need to try to gently guide them, towards a better solution. Because one of the other things that I want to mention here is, and it's kind of a running joke, it's you always go to a new business and they're always like, oh, we do things really differently here. And no, you don't. No, you just stop thinking you're doing things differently. Like, everybody's doing the same thing. There's small variations, but most business do the same thing, especially in big, corporations, because people at the top just move from one to the other. It's usually very similar problems that have very similar solutions.
I think the other issue with coming from the technology side, when you're trying to understand, doing the active listening, scratch, is that you're also expected to actually do a lot of work on the technology side. So I find it important to have the mental space, the energy, the creativity, I suppose, because if I'm deep down in some integration or, some technical question of some sort, maybe working with the client IT representatives or something, but then I have to context switch and, do a business piece. Like, why are we really doing this? What's behind this? Like you were saying, it's quite an effort, don't you think?
Yes, it is. And this is my core belief, that the tool doesn't really matter in the end. I think what's important is to have a good team with mixed skills. Actually, that project, the paper project that we're replacing. So I was still in one of my implementation phase. So that was just before pre-sales, actually. And so I was the LSA, the lead system architect in Pega lingo. And I remember, so we were in this hotel meeting room, just ironing out requirement. And then so we had some onshore resources, but we had a bunch of offshore resources as well. And so we had an LSA to drive the offshore resources. Guy comes in, bit shy, but then I quickly realized the guy is brilliant, very good, way better than me, technically speaking. And I remember coming back home that night, I was like, shit, there's this guy and he's way better than I am. And then I was like, well, there's no point in fighting it, right? Like, the guy's better than me. There's nothing I can do about this. What can I do about that? Or, how can I still be useful to the project? Or can I still be useful to the project? And then I decided, we'll have a chat and then we'll see. And then we actually got along brilliantly. And it was very good because he didn't want to do any presentation. He's a very shy, introverted type of guy. And it worked very well because it kind of pushed me towards pre-sales, because I started suddenly doing all the sprint presentation to the wider group, all the, going to the business, asking stuff. And so we worked really well in tandem. And that's when I started realizing, well, actually, I can still have my space in technology, even though I'm not going to be the best person to do the implementation. I still understand it, right? Like I can go and implement an API, I can understand an architecture diagram, I understand very well how Pega works. But I can do that link between the technology and what is outside of the core software Pega, right? Like, because there's an entire world. There's the business, there's the architecture, there's security, there's a bunch of other people in the company that you need to interact with when you're implementing something.
Yeah, you had a clear picture of the context, I suppose, because, well, first of all, you were on site, right?
Yeah.
And of course, you had built already the relationships, so you could interact with the people.
Yeah. Well, we were fairly early in the project, so it was. I think you arrived maybe a few days after me, so we were very quickly we found our pace, and it's a model I've applied with success for myself, at least, in my career later on, and now I know that if so I'm freelancing at the moment, but if I'm going on a call, I always preface the call by saying, look, if you need a technical guy, I'm not that guy. I've really embraced this. But it was when you're an LSA, it's a bit of you're like, oh shit.
And so in that project, how did it turn out?
It turned out really well. So I'm talking about this project because it's a massive success. We delivered a month in advance. We had 6 months. We delivered in 5 months. So it was, people were ecstatic. I remember the lunch party. Like, no, it was a great success, which is absolutely not entirely down to myself, right? Like, we had fantastic developers, fantastic tests, fantastic business, and I have to give credit to the project lead, fantastic guy, because in big organization, one of the I think it's in French that we say, if you've got two people, well, two humans, politics starts. And big organization, it's a bit of a political mess. And that project lead not only was very human and had a lot of empathy, and he had not much technical knowledge, but he knew how things worked within the company, so he knew who to ask for stuff. And I think, so to go back to that initial point is, I don't think the technology itself really matters, although it does, right? Like, if you have a good tool, you're going to do better. But I think the team behind it is more important. I would say a successful project is going to be, let's apply the 80-20% rule. I'd say it's 80% people, 20% technology.
Amazing. If you found this story inspiring, please like and subscribe to help us share it with more people.
Blueprints of Innovation.
So, Damien, on this show, we use the second segment to talk about the tools, methods, or technologies that we mentioned previously. So let's do the following. First, let's do a bit of a description of what that entails, in our digital transformation projects, to be working with teams that are distributed. So define a little bit what that means. But then I'll want to, in the next segment, focus more on the, let's say, practical advice that we can give people to do this well. So start us off with what is, a project that uses an offshore team.
So a project uses an offshore team simply has developers that are never or virtually, well, nearly never on site, because they're going to be in another country, quite literally. And usually the reason is cost, because if you go to other countries, particularly outside Europe or the US, you will have developers as skilled for, fraction of the price, because the life over there costs less money.
What variations of these models?
So you have so usually so onshore, full team on site, traditional stuff, people go to the office, they deliver. Then you've got offshoring and nearshoring. Nearshoring is staying quite close to your shore, to your country, and offshoring is usually going further away. So if you actually look, the further away you go from Europe or the US, the cheaper it gets. The problem is time zone becomes an issue, and so nearshoring can also be a solution. The other thing about nearshoring, you can more easily go there, and they can more easily come to you. So, and then there's variation. I've seen projects that use onshore, nearshore, and offshore.
And now, since of course the pandemic, all of this is also combined with remote work.
Exactly. And then we have even more variation because, companies will have completely embraced it or not embraced it and ask for people to come back to the office. And I think we're a bit in a flux at the moment. And I in the end, I think every model is viable. It's all about how you set it up.
And that's a good point for us to transition to the next segment.
Innovators Playbook.
And in this third and final segment, we want to give practical advice that our audience can use. Should leaders who are, having to make that decision of how much onshore, how much offshore, how much remote work, etc., should they be focused on productivity?
Yeah, I think we are talking about productivity. I think to have a productive team, you need to have trust. Because let's be honest, there's always going to be people that are going to take, well, I'm being very French and vulgar here, but that take the piss, right? But I really don't think it's a majority of people. I think that your guys, if you trust them, and look, I became a dad 8 years ago. Honestly, working from home is a godsend from that perspective. I get to make myself a coffee, go down. The kids have just come back from school. I can take 10-minute break with the kids. It's fantastic. It's amazing. And I'm so glad I have this opportunity. And every new parent or every parent will have the same thing. Or if you need to take care of some stuff in your house, it's very practical to have the opportunity to work from home. Now, at least for me, what works for me is I cannot work from home 100%. COVID was very difficult from that point of view. I like to meet people face to face. I know some people can work remotely and be incredibly productive. But for me, I need a healthy mix of both. And I usually, what's interesting is since COVID, when I came back to work, I really had a bit of a thought around how do I work from home and how do I work from the office. And it's interesting how if I'm in the office, I'm going to structure my week very differently than if I'm working from home. Because if I'm working from home, I can be incredibly efficient. Because if I decide to have 2 hours, no notification, nobody can just pop up my desk, say, hey, Damien, let's go for coffee. Or, hey, Damien, let's go for lunch. Let's do that. No, you're there and you can have full focus concentration for 3 hours. And so I use that when I'm working from home. If I'm in the office, I usually am going to plan a lot more meetings with people, or even if it's just a coffee break or a lunch break, just because you create that relationship.
You have kind of the best of both worlds. You can
exactly
have the advantages of being, engaged with people at a human level.
I think a very concrete tip, or at least a consideration I would give people that have offshore or people that are working from home, is to actually not necessarily force them to come 2 days a week. Like I'm seeing it more and more. I don't think that really works because again, there's this notion of, you actually don't really trust your employees. Is to, sometimes just say, look, we're going to have a big team event. Like, can you guys make it this week? Let's make something fun. I mean, we're going to work, but let's do something fun together as well, because then you create that relations between people.
I feel like this is one of the most underrated aspects.
100%.
Where, office time is seen as a mechanism for control, whereas I think the opportunity is there to energize.
Yes, exactly. It's an opportunity to meet people, have a coffee, talk about other stuff than work. You need that. Productivity is not working 100% of the time. If you work 100% of the time, your actual amount of work is probably going to be less. I don't have any stats, or maybe there's some smart studies around this.
This is expert opinion. That's what this is.
I do think you need you're going to do your best work if you know your guys you're working with, if you have that team spirit. But actually, Lord of the Ring is a very good example of this. Is you got this team of guys working together towards a goal, and they don't all get along, but you've got these other elements. I think it's quite well written from that point of view, that it's a believable team, right? There's people that don't like each other. There's some people that like each other. Some of them have like deep trouble, but somehow they get to the end. They do manage to go and destroy the One Ring.
Even though this is probably an unexpected example, I think it's very close, or at least to my experience, because when I think of these digital transformations that you and I have been involved in, we are writing a certain story. Yeah, there is a technological aspect that, of course, translates into something that is running at some point. So yes, there is a realistic aspect to it, but sometimes it's all about perception, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I mean, again, another wide topic is managing expectations. And that's something you learn in pre-sales. The expectation, you need to make sure that the expectation is managed from the early. And I think that was one of my advantage in pre-sales, was understanding what happens after the thing gets sold. And I was very cautious about, I did not want people doing the implementation to suffer because of what I've done. And the other thing is, when you're in pre-sales, you realize you actually have very little time to actually analyze the exact requirements. So I understood a lot more, like when I was put in certain situation because of a sale gone, I was going to say gone wrong, but not necessarily gone wrong because it's sold, right? But yeah, so having an understanding of both worlds, again, when you're not there, again, that's a very human trait. We tend to simplify everything, and we forget certain factors, and we don't necessarily understand what the others are doing. I think it's always interesting to try to, understand that.
Absolutely. Any final message you'd like to leave our audience with?
Again, very corny, just be kind to each other. I mean, I think projects go better if people don't scream at each other, if people, genuinely are nice people, and just your project will go way better. If someone doesn't work in the team, just get rid of him. It's and it's not necessarily because they're bad people. It's just you can't get along with everyone. So yeah, just make a team that works.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Damien.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for this episode. I hope it gave you food for thought, and you'll approach your next project involving a diverse and distributed team with a renewed focus on trust. On a related note, I would like to thank all of you who filled out the guest recommendation form on our website. We're in the process of following up, but the form remains open if you know more experts who would be great guests for this show. In the meantime, we've got more episodes lined up, so stay tuned for more tales of innovation that inspire, challenge, and transform. Until next time, peace.
Thanks for tuning in to Innovation Tales. Get inspired, connect with other practitioners, and approach the digital revolution with confidence. Visit innovation-tales.com for more episodes. See you next time.